Hey everyone, so today we are going to be moving into the second of our three levels of analysis for this year, and that is the cognitive level of analysis. So in terms of an overview, the cognitive approach um, focuses on the processes by which the information that we take in from the world around us, our sensory information, what we taste, what we touch, what we see, what we smell, what is told to us and we hear, the processes by which that information is received, processed, stored, recovered, and acted upon. And I know that's quite a bunch of different processes, but really they make up things like memory, thinking and deciding, uh, what we will talk about, reconstructive memory, schema theory, and the role that emotion plays in the ways in which we process information. And really, in terms of the cognitive perspective, it's based on this idea that individuals filter, process, store, and recall information differently because of biological and sociocultural experiences. And so that makes cognitive approach different, but also connected to these other two levels of analysis. The cognitive approach also looks at how your mind and the minds of others work to discover and process the world around us, and how that impacts the actions that we make. And so in terms of thinking about these three levels of analysis, we had the biological perspective, which looked at physical processes within the brain. And the cognitive approach sort of looks at more abstract or more ways in which we store the information that we take in, and how and where and what processes that information goes through to affect our behavior. So a few principles of the cognitive perspective. The first one is that the human being is an active information processor. Our brains are constantly organizing and reorganizing and adapting and readapting to see the world around us in a different way that makes sense for our experience as human beings and makes sense for the environment around us. So the individual decides which inputs they wish to process and how thoroughly to process them, which may lead to bias. Number two is that the way we mentally process things guides our behavior. We often do not see things objectively. We take in a bunch of knowledge and information and we filter them through our prior experiences, and that may lead to some inaccuracies in the way in which we look at the world. The third principle here is that the way we mentally process representations that guide our behavior should be studied scientifically. And in order to get as objective a look as possible, we need to make sure that human thinking is thought of logically, rationally, and without bias. Number four, the way we process information is influenced by the emotions felt at the time of processing. There are many memories that we have as individuals that are colored by what we are feeling at the time in which we encode them. What we are feeling at the time that we retrieve them may bring up and may help us to remember certain emotions that are similar and certain memories that are similar as well. And the fifth one, the cognitive processes are influenced by social and cultural inputs. And again, this goes back to the idea that what we learn, how we organize, where we go, all of these environmental factors really influence the ways in which we think about the world. And we'll see that throughout the cognitive perspective, but also in the sociocultural perspective as well. So just a few research methods that are used in the cognitive perspective. There are a few. The first one are quantitative based, experimental in nature, where people are, of course, randomly sampled, and we'll see quite a few of them in this unit. The next one are observations. So seeing the process, for instance, through one remembers information or one thinks through to come up with a decision. And then also self-reporting in interviews. There are going to be some of the biological methods that we've talked about, such as brain scans, which have been integrated into cognitive research, though, as well. So with experimental methods, oftentimes there are inferential results. And what this means is that we can't get, we have to do some level of inference. We have to make some educated guesses because of the fact that you could not see cognitive processes specifically on or in an experiment. We can't see a memory on a brain scan. We have to form a basis for a theory from the results of experiments, which may or may not be backed up by other experiments. And so this tends to give indirect rather than direct findings. We don't see brain cells reconstructing memory, for instance, even though we're fairly sure that this is what happens. The second method here are interviews. So these may be used where cognitive issues are investigated in detail. And they are used in things like flashbulb memories or the study of flashbulb memories. And flashbulb memories, again, are a detailed memory that is encoded specifically because it is so emotional in nature and so important in nature to the life of the individual. And so the participant may interview, allowing for the gleaning of information from participants because it is difficult to ascertain cognition in many other ways. And again, the information gleaned from these findings oftentimes become the foundation of the theory, but do not give direct information of the cognitive processes actually operating inside the brain. And then observational methods. So these are used within studies where individuals may or may not be able to describe the cognitive processes being observed or their thoughts. So a study on babies or children would have to have someone observing the children or observing the babies in order to glean information from them. And again, these form the basis on which to construct theory. A lot of cognitive research is forming the foundation for theory, which we then add on later with additional studies, additional information, additional thinking over time. Brain scans. So these were recently used to discover if there are biological functions at work within cognition. So are there different parts of the brain that deal with cognition in ways that are different than what we thought? So CAT scans, PET scans, MRIs, fMRIs have all been used to ascertain this information. And this is most likely to be used as more in being as more is being discovered about the extremely complex biological workings of the brain. So as technology becomes more sophisticated, the more we are using these methods in order to learn more about cognition. But in these types of research methods for brain scans, direct information and not inferences can be drawn. You can directly see on the screen what parts of the brain are funneling thinking and deciding or memory or other cognitive processes. Now, in terms of ethical considerations to be thought of in the cognitive approach, oftentimes a lot of them are very similar to the biological and sociocultural approaches because the participants must know why the study is being done, their involvement is voluntary, what the data will be used for, possibly be debriefed at the end of the study. But a few that specifically come into contact with the cognitive approach. The first one is informed consent. This is required in almost all cases, except for ones where deception has to be used in some way, and it is for the benefit of the science. In some cognitive studies, though, as it says there, informed consent is waived as there is no way to get the required information. So a study like Loftus and Palmer that we're going to see in this unit had to use deception in order to learn more about the ways in which people reconstruct their memory, and sometimes that leads to different answers based on the questions that they receive. The next one is anonymity. This is protecting the privacy of the individual involved, and this is done even with the risk of reducing the authenticity of the research. And so you have to protect the anonymity of the person. So even in a case like the HM study that we looked at in the biological unit, HM is not his real name. HM is a pseudonym that was used to protect him as an individual. The third one are harm to individuals, especially with brain scans. This comes into context, and also with self-reporting interviews with information that is sensitive in nature. If you are culling past memories of abuse or trauma or violence against someone, that might be something where no physical harm is being done to them, but there's definitely an emotional or mental toll that's taking place there. So that has to be considered in weighing it out with the science that is being gleaned from it. All right, at this point, this is our talk for today. If you have any questions about the ethical considerations or research methods used in the cognitive approach, please come talk to me. We will continue to think about and talk about research and ethics in cognitive research throughout this unit and throughout this year. Have a great day.